Hello, everybody, and welcome to BVM Sports Chalk Talk. I'm Lucas Semb, joined by my colleagues Scott Procter and Matt Morris, ready to talk all things sports for you today. As always, thank you for tuning in. We very much appreciate the support, and we've got another intriguing episode lined up for you today. We will be revealing our losers of NFL free agency this far and breaking down how some injuries have impacted the NBA's Western Conference playoff race. But first, we'll make our mock draft picks for picks number 6 and number 7 in the upcoming NFL draft. Scott, one of your favorites, the Miami Dolphins, are on the clock at 6. What do you think they'll be doing?
Yes, sir. Miami Dolphins number 6 pick is something that I felt very confident in for a while. And I believe they do too. Head coach Brian Flores and GM Chris Grier were seen, all buddy and, talking at length with Alabama head coach Nick Saban at his Senior Bowl practice here recently. And it could have been about former Crimson Tide and now Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, but I think it was more about the reigning Heisman Trophy winner and AP College Football Player of the Year, DeVonta Smith. I know we all remember Tua throwing the game-winning touchdown to Smith in the 2018 National Championship, and I'm willing to bet that the Dolphins want to run that back. Not only did Smith get significantly better each of his 4 seasons at Alabama to the point where he was completely and totally unguardable in the National Championship game against Ohio State, but not only that, but the Dolphins have drafted 4 Alabama players in the first 3 rounds of the last 5 drafts. There seems to be a legitimate Alabama to Miami pipeline. And I'll tell you what else. The Miami Dolphins, along with the Cleveland Browns, as I've said on this show, are the 2 teams that I've identified as the biggest challengers and perhaps even the only challengers to the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC, because with an improved and, comfortable Tua Tagovailoa in year 2 with DeVonta Smith, Will Fuller on the inside, Devontae Parker on the outside, and Mike Gesicki at tight end to throw to with that elite defense, I expect Miami to win the AFC East and make some noise in the postseason. And one last thing, I promise I'll wrap up before I pass it to you, Matt. The last thing, I don't think those conversations I mentioned at the top between Flores, Grier, and Saban were solely about Smith or even Tua for that matter, but also Najee Harris. I expect the Dolphins to address running back in the draft, but if they can land Najee Harris at either number 18 or number 36, watch out. Go ahead, man. What do you think the Dolphins do with the number 6?
Yeah, Scott. I like the Najee Harris move. I think that would be awesome later in the round. He's obviously the best running back in this draft, and his ability both running and catching the ball will be great in this modern NFL. Some context. I love DeVonta Smith. I'm choosing Ja'Marr Chase simply because obviously you had Ja'Marr Chase going to Cincinnati. I have Penei Sewell going to Cincinnati. So Ja'Marr Chase is still available for the Miami Dolphins in my belief in how I think the draft is going to go. So for all the reasons you talked about last week, why Ja'Marr Chase would be perfect for Cincinnati, they're still there. He obviously was the best wide receiver last year, or 2 years ago now, on an LSU team that featured Justin Jefferson and a plethora of NFL talent. He had 1,700 yards, 20 TDs. He's 6 foot. He runs a 4.34 40. And the thing about it that's really, going to be amazing if the Dolphins can get Chase at 6 is, I think one of the biggest knocks on Tua last year is everybody always said he was too conservative with the ball. He didn't push it downfield. He didn't make any deep ball threats and throw it, and make those plays. You're going to make those plays if you have Ja'Marr Chase on your team. According to PFF, 68% catchable deep ball targets was what he was able to do in 2019. That's the most of anyone in this draft. He is a deep ball threat. Ja'Marr Chase on Miami would allow Tua to take that next step in his progression as a franchise quarterback and allow Miami to really double down on what was a very impressive season. 10-6, they missed the playoffs very closely, and they have to keep up because right now the Buffalo Bills are the lead in their division, and Miami wants to stay competitive and be that next best team and keep New England down, because the more you can keep New England down, the better it'll be for Miami.
So, man, I have a question for you. Obviously, you mentioned at the top there that you still have, Ja'Marr Chase and DeVonta Smith available on your board at this point. Explain to me why the Miami Dolphins, seeing both of those receivers, on their board, why would they not choose a DeVonta Smith, who, again, I mentioned has the rapport with Tua Tagovailoa, and Ja'Marr Chase, who sat out this season? Why would they pick Chase over Smith? Is it that much of a talent difference in your eyes between those two that Miami can't pass up on Chase over Smith? Is that what this is?
I think the talent difference is, it's probably not as big as everybody might think it is.
Because like I said last week, just to go, like I said last week, I don't think the gap is big at all.
No, I don't think it is either, but I still think that, if you're the Miami Dolphins, as great as, you might think that chemistry may be if you bring in Devontae Smith, and obviously they like Alabama, it's hard to pass up a Jamar Chase and justify it on some of those sort of intangible things when you still have Jamar Chase on the board. If they go with Devontae Smith, I don't think anybody's really going to be knocking them for it until, we get 5 years down the road and we can really look back at this. But if Jamar Chase is on the board, I think you owe it to your fan base, to your organization, to choose Jamar Chase because he is clearly the best wide receiver in this draft.
Sure, and Matt, I'll kind of help you out here and answer Scott's question because on my board, both Chase and Smith are available as well. And after watching this past season, Scott makes a case. It's hard to pass on Devontae Smith, a Heisman winner. He played college football at an unparalleled level this season. It's hard to pick anyone else, but between age, measurements, testing, the tapes, Chase is the pick here. And I think that kind of is the answer. Before opting out this past season, in 2019, he was teammates with Justin Jefferson at LSU, and he outperformed him. And we saw what Jefferson did in the league. Chase is bigger than Devontae Smith, and that's really been his only knock. He's got a slight frame at 175 pounds, and I know Jamar Chase is at that 200 marker. He's got a 4.3, 4.40. He repped out 225 on the bench 23 times as a wide receiver, which is just incredible. He's got a 41-inch vertical, and none of this is to say that he's going to be a good NFL wide receiver. But when we evaluate talent, this is all we have to go by. And he has everything you need to make that smooth transition to the NFL. And the Dolphins, they want an alpha. I think this is their guy. He's shown he can be that with Justin Jefferson in the same system as him. You pair him with the newly acquired Will Fuller and Devontae Parker. Think about how good Devontae Parker was as a number one option for the Miami Dolphins. And now, in my case, I think you bring in Jamar Chase and Devontae Parker is going to be a number 3 option behind Fuller and Chase. So I think if the draft goes this way, that's how it'll pan out. They're going to give Tua a chance to actually succeed in the NFL, and they'll have their offense of the future with Jamar Chase. But at the number 7 slot is the new look Detroit with Jared Goff under center this year and a brand new coaching staff. Matt, who do you think the Lions will pick at number 7?
Yeah, I think that the Lions are going to be a team where when you bring in Goff, you're obviously not sure if they're going to go all in with him, but they still need to rebuild. And I think with how this draft is going and how adamant some teams are at upgrading their quarterback position, I think that, obviously 6 is an opportunity to trade up. I think Detroit will be a team that people reach out to and try and trade with. And so I have Detroit making a trade and having the 4th quarterback going off of the board at this position. I think that you can look at – I know Scott had Denver going earlier and trading up with, I think, Atlanta. Yeah. I think Denver could be an option here. I think that the New England Patriots are also adamant about moving up, and I think that the Chicago Bears have even now talked about it, even though they signed, the Red Rifle. They obviously think that they can still upgrade at that position. I think 7 is a good spot because there are some clear guys ahead of 7 where you have to draft them if you're one of those teams, whether it's a Penei Sewell, a Kyle Pitts, a Jamar Chase. If they're available, it's hard to justify trading back. I think Detroit at 7 can still, if they want to draft Devontae Smith, that's not a bad situation. But I think that this is a team with a lot of needs and a lot of holes to fill overall. And the ability to trade with a team that is desperate to get their quarterback of the future before this season will allow them to get a great haul for that number 7 pick. They can move back and they can still draft some of the guys that they need and fill some needs later on in this draft because it is deep in wide receiver and there are some other positions that they can still upgrade at later on in the draft.
Yeah, man, I think that makes a lot of sense. As I said last week, I think Atlanta is the team that trades back. But I think if they don't do it, there's going to be somebody that trades, within that top 10. And if it's not Atlanta, I think, Detroit here at number 7 is a viable, possible reality. But, honestly, I originally had Oregon tackle Penei Sewell slotted to go here at number 7 to the Detroit Lions until I asked myself a couple questions. The first one being, When was the last time the Detroit Lions were relevant? And the answer to that question would be, well, when Calvin Johnson was wearing number 81 and dominating the league. And the second question I ask myself is, who has been compared to Calvin Johnson, Megatron, due to similarities in size and skill by many, including my very co-host here, Lucas Semb, just last week? Well, that answer is Kyle Pitts. And, that's honestly who I believe the Lions select number 7 overall. They'll be getting a dynamic playmaker who is a matchup nightmare because he's too fast and athletic for linebackers and too big and strong for defensive backs. Detroit also needs to figure out if the quarterback they just traded for, Jared Goff, can be the man for a while, or if they have to draft the quarterback next year again. Bringing in a talent like Pitts to go alongside another Pro Bowl caliber tight end and TJ Hawkinson will help in that pursuit. The Lions just watched their star wide receiver, my guy Kenny Galladay, head to the New York Giants. And again, this franchise's last taste of relevance was tied to a game-changing receiving talent. And I think Detroit goes back to that again for Kyle Pitts.
Sure, I like the Pitts take, but in my last take for Jamar Chase, you heard me endorsing Devontae Smith, and that's who the Lions should be taking here. Right now, the Lions offense needs to rebuild. They lost Kenny Galladay and they lost Marvin Jones, and they replaced them with Tyrell Williams and Brashad Perriman. Yeah. Obviously a significant downgrade, obviously not a long-term play, and they need to make this move. They're set at running back with DeAndre Swift, who looks like he's turning into a valid NFL back, and now they need to bolster the receiving core. To me personally, I don't care if Devontae Smith is small. He played at the highest level of college football for the best team in the nation. He won the Heisman playing against loads of NFL talent. For example, he's the only college wide receiver ever to get 50-plus yards on top emerging cornerback talent, J.C. Horn. He had 23 touchdown grabs this season, breaking the single-season SEC record. This is just what he does. This is who he is. And if the Lions do anything else here, they are just continuing a downward spiral that has started since they brought in Jared Goff to play quarterback for them.
I would argue that downward spiral started long before the Lions brought in Jared Goff, but I definitely get the point.
Right, I think that Jared Goff is kind of the cherry on top. He's not the move. Right, but meanwhile, NFL free agency has been taking place, and there's been lots of movement, lots of players finding new homes, but some teams haven't been so fortunate as to make a big splash. Scott, which team, in your opinion, has had the worst offseason so far?
I am so upset at John Gruden, Mike Mayock, and the Las Vegas Raiders. Russell Wilson lists you as one of 4 possible destinations that he would go to via trade. The others were the Saints, which never would have worked because of their cap situation, the Cowboys, who just extended their quarterback, Dak Prescott, and the Bears, who just paid Andy Dalton to be their starter. How do the Raiders respond as the last viable option on Wilson's list? Well, they completely deplete their offensive line and get significantly worse in the process. They trade away their center and future Hall of Famer Rodney Hudson, who played every snap for them last season. They trade away their right guard, Gabe Jackson, who played 98% of their snaps last season, and traded away right tackle Trent Brown, who 2 years ago, they just made the highest paid offensive lineman in NFL history. The entire right side of what actually was a solid offensive line and probably a big reason why Russell Wilson listed the Raiders as one of his 4 destinations, the entire right side of that offensive line is gone. But thank God they re-signed 37-year-old Richie Incognito, who missed 14 games this past season and has had a bevy of on-field and off-the-field issues. The signing of Kenyon Drake also makes no sense to me either because Josh Jacobs is a bell cow, 3-down running back in his prime, and now the both of them will have a worse offensive line to work with. The additions of John Brown and Willie Snead at receiver are cool, I guess, if you're into that kind of thing, but throwing the ball was never the issue last season for Vegas. I don't know what John Gruden or Mike Mayock are doing, but it appears that they're trying to get themselves fired, and the Raiders are the biggest losers of free agency because of it.
What, in your opinion, was the problem for the Raiders last season?
Defense. Simple. Rushing the passer.
To you, what would have been an ideal signing? And in what situation, what kind of player could they have signed to kind of up their linebacker unit or their defensive back, defensive back, defensive end?
Sure. Well, first off, my biggest issue with them is the people that they let walk out of the door. The Raiders had an above-average offensive line this past season with, again, a future Hall of Famer, arguably the greatest tackle currently still playing in the league right now in Trent Brown on their roster, and they let them both walk out the door. The second thing is they had to address, like I said, the defense, rushing the passer. They did bring in Yannick Ngakoue, who played for obviously the Vikings and the Jaguars as well, if I'm not mistaken. Not the Jaguars, but
the Ravens. The Ravens.
That's
He had
what
an
it was.
incredible season flipping teams.
And Yannick Ngakoue, that's going to be a nice pickup. But again, they had to address that front seven. That was the biggest issue. They also let LaMarcus Joyner, the safety, walk in free agency as well. So again, there's holes here that were glaring for the Raiders last season that they didn't address. And not only did they not address their issues, but they let a solid foundation that they had just walk out the door. And for those reasons, I have big issues with what John Gruden, Mike Mayock had done.
Well, Mike Mayock better be good at what he originally did before being GM, and that is draft analysis and
Absolutely.
projecting what draft prospects will be able to do, because now that's all they have. I mean, they've traded everything so that they can draft. Who knows why? Because it felt like they were a team that probably could push to try and win now somewhat, although it's always tough when you're in Kansas City's division.
That's where you guys lose me. The Raiders weren't gonna do anything to win right now. They're not that team.
That's where I disagree with you, Luke, and that's where I agree with Ned. I think it's a great point that he brought up, and another reason why I'm so upset with what they've done in Las Vegas, because I personally believe that they were close. Especially
close to what? Let's be realistic about their
the last team to beat the Chiefs in a regular season game where the Chiefs were fully healthy were the Las Vegas Raiders, and they did it in a shootout. Derek Carr and obviously Darren Waller is a top 3 tight end. Derek Carr, when he's on, he's a great quarterback, and again, they had the offense, and again, like I mentioned, the issue was the defense. If they were able to shore up that defense, I would have been looking at the Raiders as real players in the AFC as far as I'm concerned, and even in that AFC West with the Chiefs.
Go ahead, Matt.
No, I agree. I mean, I agree completely with what Scott said, and Las Vegas it'll be interesting to see what they do now with no O-line. But for me, the biggest loser is the Chicago Bears. I think that the Bears have not had a fully formed plan on how they are going to take the talent that they have and utilize it to the best of their abilities, probably for 5 years now.
That's a nice way to put it.
12-4. They had a Vic Fangio defense that was Super Bowl caliber. They draft Mitch. They trade up to get Mitch Trubisky. He surprisingly goes 12-4 that season, and they lose on a double doink in the playoffs. Since then, they have had no true plan on what to do. You move on from Mitch Trubisky because you basically have wanted to for the last 2 years probably now. But when you originally moved on from him in the season and you went to Nick Foles, the biggest issue with Nick Foles is no matter what play you called or what you wanted him to do, he had no time to do it because the O-line is tremendous, or just awful. That tremendously awful is what it is. And so instead of going out and adding O-line help or trying to bring in someone, maybe calling up Vegas because they obviously were having a fire sale on all of their great offensive linemen, you instead go out and you sign Andy Dalton, who just came off of a season where he also didn't have a great O-line, and, they did okay, I guess, but he also had much better wide receiver talent overall than what he's coming into with Chicago. I love Allen Robinson.
In the Bears' defense, I would rather have Dalton throwing me passes than Trubisky or Foles. If it's a short term, we need a guy for this season. We're going to draft a QB. We're going to build one up. We're not going to.
But I'm not paying Andy Dalton $10 million to do that.
No,
I'm not. I'm not giving up Kyle Fuller just to release him to do that. And that was a huge hit to the locker room. And there's a lot of guys now that just don't want to be there because they got rid of Kyle Fuller for nothing. You lost Robertson Harris. I mean, you've brought in Marquise Goodwin, and Robinson is back, which is great. But Robinson doesn't want to be back because he wanted a long-term deal that you should have gave him earlier in the season or last season. You bring in Desmond Trufant to, I guess, replace Kyle Fuller, which is just an awful downgrade. The Chicago Bears have no plan. They are wasting away the prime years of Khalil Mack, Akeem Hicks, Eddie Jackson. The list goes on. I mean, Roquan Smith was a great draft pick, and he's been amazing, but they're wasting him away too. There is no plan in Chicago, and unfortunately what's probably going to happen is maybe they get to 8-8 again, but they will not make the playoffs. And once again, the offense will look horrible, and they will have had Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy destroy another season for the Chicago Bears.
Right, Matt, you're right. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I'll just be quick before you go. I just have to address, the mess that's going on in Chicago. And Matt, I hate you for doing this because you're just making me upset all over again.
Oh, I hate it too. I hate that I have to do it though. Like I have to vent about this somewhere. So I get to be on the show.
It's awful. And like you said, like I said, you're being nice by saying that the Bears don't have a plan. That's a very nice way of putting it. What the Bears have done, it's like quarterback position. Again, you traded up. just some quick history. You traded up to draft Mitchell Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. Then you fast forward and you pay Nick Foles after a season-ending injury to come in and back up the guy that I previously mentioned who you traded up to draft who was underperformed as a starter. And now you let Mitchell Trubisky walk and you bring in another underachiever as of late at the quarterback position, Andy Dalton, and pay him north of $10 million to be your starter, all the while letting Kyle Fuller, a defensive leader, walk out of the door. And like you mentioned, Matt, and I've been saying this for the last 2 or 3 years ago, the Bears are staring 8-8 in the face at best. That's as best as it's going to get. And, if Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy are fine, leaving Chicago with that as their resume, as their record, then, so be it. But, as a former Chicago Bears fan that grew up and was born in Chicago and loved the Bears, it's just a sad time.
And I'll finish with this real quick. I said it before on this show. The Bears are they're in a win now scenario simply based on the context in which, the ownership is given Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, which is figure it out, win now, and use the talent that you have, which is, if you look on paper, fairly playoff caliber. Like this is an impressive team on paper with the defense and some of the weapons that they have. None of the moves that they have done this offseason suggest that they are in a win now scenario. I don't even know what this is. This is a win 8-8 scenario. I mean, just go to Green Bay and lose 2 games a season. I don't know what this is because I can't understand these moves and why they are somehow going to make the Bears true contenders.
2 quick things that the Bears can possibly save face after all of this mess. The first thing, it'd be righting a wrong that they did in the past. If the Bears can find a trade partner to trade up into the top 10 or maybe at number 10 and maybe select a Trey Lance or perhaps a Trey Lance or perhaps a Justin Fields if he falls for some reason and they turn out to be what they're supposed to be, that's the only way they can save face.
Well, what's funny is Matt Nagy doesn't like that kind of a quarterback. Mitch Trubisky was the mobile quarterback that could throw on the run but couldn't be a pocket passer. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, I want Nick Foles. Even though Mitch Trubisky is winning games.
Kyle Trask is a guy that they could develop. That's their kind of quarterback, and I think that's realistic.
They're not going to be around long enough to. They're not going to be around long enough to develop.
Yeah, Matt Nagy won't be developing a Kyle Trask.
I was going to say, Scott, you said Nagy and Pace are, if they're okay leaving Chicago with this as their resume, and that's absolutely going to be the case, following this season, because this is they were down to their last straw, and they definitely blew it. So barring any miracles this season, they're definitely going to be out of there, and the rebuild is going to be in full effect. Sorry, Matt. Sorry, Logan Hansen. It's just a tough time for the Chicago Bears at the moment. It's hard to vote against them for the worst offseason. But for me, I want to take a look at the AFC North. The Ravens got Lamar Jackson, a top offensive lineman, and Kevin Zeitler, and a wide receiver weapon finally, and Sammy Watkins to go alongside Hollywood Brown. And the Browns added Jadeveon Clowney, Troy Hill, John Johnson, and the Bengals brought on Riley Reif to protect Burrow. And on defense, they got Trey Hendrickson, Eli Apple, Chidobe Awuzie. That's a mouthful. And amongst multiple others, all these teams got better, and that were allegedly already good, got a lot better. And then I look at the Steelers. Meanwhile, they lose James Conner and sign Kalen Ballage to replace him. They did re-sign Juju Smith-Schuster, but they made the decision for whatever reason that Big Ben is still going to be throwing balls to him. They didn't make any notable signings on offense or defense, and They are essentially the same team from last season that started 11-0 and then fizzled out, losing 5 of their last 6, including a wild card loss to their division rival Browns. I think the Steelers do draft a running back and still finish ahead of the Bengals this year at least. But this is not a playoff team, and they'll have a very tough time in the AFC North.
Don't forget they didn't replace their Hall of Fame center that retired at the end of the season.
Right. I mean, it's a situation that, like I said, you look back at it, they're the exact same team they were minus James Conner. And right now on paper, that's tough looking in a division that is arguably the best in football. Scott, yeah. I know you said you had some gripes with my pick. I'd like to hear about it.
Well, I'll be not gripes, plural, just one. But, I'll be honest out the gate, though. I think the biggest indictment on the Pittsburgh Steelers and what they've done this offseason is letting Big Ben come back. I think his playing days of being an elite quarterback are done. And, especially –
elite quarterback, those days are long gone. I'm talking serviceable at this point.
Well, I mean,
game manager.
It's tough to say serviceable because if you look at the stats, Big Ben, had a pretty solid statistical season last year. I think he threw 30-plus touchdowns, only threw about, 10 or 12 interceptions. But again, when you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, who at this point, they used to be, run the ball, play defense. But now this team's makeup is there's 4 great wide receivers on that team, another great tight end. And they're good. Their MO is going to be able to throw the ball down the field, and I don't know if Big Ben has that at this point in his career. So that is a big indictment on the Pittsburgh Steelers offseason. But the reason I can't name them a loser or call them a loser at any point, during this offseason is because of what they just did on Tuesday morning. The Steelers just re-signed Mike Tomlin to a 3-year extension through the 2024 season. This is a head coach who 14 years in the National Football League has never had a losing season. It doesn't matter whether it's Devlin Hodges at quarterback or the other guy who I can't name who came from Oklahoma State, Mason Rudolph. Yeah, Mason Rudolph. It doesn't really matter who's at quarterback, whether James Conner is, at running back, being a non-option. It doesn't really matter who's on the field for the Steelers. They're going to finish at a minimum 8-8 or, in typical years at 10-6, 11-5. And, again, you mentioned last year everybody has a bad taste in their mouths about how they finished, but not many teams can say they've rattled off 11 straight wins in the National Football League. And, that has a lot to do with Mike Tomlin. So for that reason, and them keeping a top 5 head coach, a future Hall of Fame coach, in their building for at least another 3 years, I cannot call them a loser by any means.
You make a good case with Tomlin. It's just that a coach is really as good as his players are, and Tomlin has had historically good teams in Pittsburgh. And I don't think any of us can deny that. Not to say he's been put in situations where he's had to have low-tier quarterbacks in there, like you just mentioned, and he's made do it. He's made them good. But historically, offensively and defensively, he's had good teams.
Even from that point, there have been plenty of good teams that have looked good on paper, that have had talent. Look at the Dallas Cowboys in recent history. They've had talent. They've had good players, but coaching is what's held them back. And, just go ahead, man. That's really what I have to say about that.
No, honestly, I think –
Actually, one last thing, and I've been consistent about this as well. The NFL, I've said on multiple occasions, and I got to be honest, I stole this from Max Kellerman. The NFL is a coach's league. I rave about the coaches in the NFL all the time. The NBA is a players' league. The MLB is a front office league to put all the pieces together. But in the NFL, if you have a great coach, you have a great chance of being one of the last few teams standing at the end of each season.
Absolutely. And the only thing I could say as far as against Tomlin is when they were beginning to fizzle out after that 11 straight wins, he wasn't able to figure it out. I don't know if an added offseason and some training camp and OTAs and all of that will allow him to figure out the issue, which is somewhat questionable O-line, especially now with losing Pouncey, and then no run game at all. If your defense stays healthy, you still have a top 5 defense. You obviously have a great passing game. They just need to address the O-line and their running game, and they'll be set. And honestly, for all these teams, even the Bears, if you just go out and you draft well next week, it fixes a lot of the questions, at least in the offseason, as to if they're, who really lost this free agency. If you can have a good draft, it fixes a lot of problems in the short term, and then once the rubber hits the road, we'll see if it actually helps out. And that's true for all 3 teams that we've picked as clear losers of free agency.
Right. Well, let's move over to the NBA here as we wrap up and just real quick touch on the Western Conference playoff picture that's been derailed by some injuries. Most recently, the news of Jamal Murray tearing his ACL, Donovan Mitchell with an undisclosed injury, Damian Lillard has missed multiple games in a row. LeBron and AD are still out. Matt, how will these injuries impact the landscape of the Western Conference?
Well, I mean, it's good news for Phoenix. I mean, if Phoenix can stay healthy and continue to play as well as they have, they have as good of a chance as anyone to take that number 1 seed. You know, credit the Jazz; they have played very well without Donovan Mitchell, and they even had a game against the Lakers without Rudy Gobert. That was a fun eat. And what was crazy is there were no superstars in that game. I still enjoyed watching that game going into overtime with Dennis Schroeder having an amazing night, Jordan Clarkson, all those guys. They still have a great team, so Utah can keep it together, but I think Phoenix definitely could step up, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were the number 1 seed. This is great, honestly, for the Lakers, too. It makes their ability to rest LeBron and AD as much as possible, just prolong that process, make sure that they come back healthy for when it matters. They can still hover right where they're at and not really worry about falling down to 6th or even past that, which is really where the cutoff is this year with the new playoff rules. And then it's going to be interesting to see what happens with the rest of the West and see if some teams move up past that 6th seed. I mean, the Trailblazers and Damian Lillard, to his credit, has had an amazing season holding the Trailblazers above water. Now it's their turn to do it without him. We'll see if that happens. And this will be a chance for some teams right in the bottom of the West to make that final push to see if they can take advantage of some injury-prone teams. But overall, it won't affect anything until the playoffs. That's when you need a Jamal Murray. That's when you need a Donovan Mitchell. That's when you need LeBron and AD and a Damian Lillard. So right now there might be some interesting, seeding, but it won't overall affect anything until we get to the playoffs, and then we find out who's out for a game.
Yeah, there's 2 things here for me. The first being about Jamal Murray's injury. First off, I just hate to see that happen to a big superstar. I wish him just a speedy recovery. And I especially hate to see it when I thought the Nuggets had as good a chance as anybody to meet the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals. I don't feel that way about them anymore because Denver cannot win 2 playoff series without Jamal Murray in the Western Conference. But, as I said last week on the From Deep podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, etc., Nikola Jokic's MVP odds stand to improve significantly as a result of Jamal Murray's injury. He has the numbers, he has the historic PER, and he's doing things we've simply never seen before from a big man. But if the Joker can keep Denver afloat or even improve their standing out west, he might become the MVP favorite if he isn't already. In nights like Monday night where he drops 47, 15, and 8 in a double overtime win with the 3 that is all but clinches the win. No, nights like that are going to help. And the second thing is this, Matt, you mentioned that the Utah Jazz, are winners, as a result of Jamal's unfortunate injury. But I believe, that injury has paved the way for an all Los Angeles Western Conference Finals between the Lakers and the Clippers.
I said the Suns.
The Suns. Sorry about that. You did say the Suns. Sorry about that. But, AD will return any day now, and the Lakers supporting cast has kept them afloat in the Stars' absence. And honestly, I think it'll bode well from them down the line when AD and Bron inevitably return. Meanwhile, the Clippers are as hot as anybody right now, and I expect them to finally make their first Western Conference Finals appearance as long as Paul George avoids another meltdown. So, Jamal Murray's injury could have major implications, not only on the MVP race, but the Western Conference race as a whole, in my opinion.
Sure, and let me start by saying these injuries suck. NBA fans are getting cheated out of watching some of the best play, and it sucks for the athletes, and, parts of their careers are being wasted. All around, it's a bad situation, and I feel for the athletes. But at the same time, when it comes down to it, to answer the question, these injuries we're seeing right now are not really going to change things. And to explain that, the Nuggets lost Jamal Murray, but he wasn't going to get them to the finals. Donovan Mitchell is banged up, and that's bad for them, but he's not going to get them past the Clippers or the Lakers. AD and LeBron will be back when it matters most, and I fully expect the Lakers or the Clippers to get to the finals this year. Their star power and their playoff experience is just far too much for any other team. The injuries may change up a few things in terms of seeding, like Matt said, but when it's all said and done in the big picture, nothing is going to be changed. But we are less than 30 days away from the start of the NBA's new play-in tournament, so playoff hoops is right around the corner, and the true answer to this question will reveal itself. But that's all the time we've got today here at Chalk Talk. For myself, Scott Proctor, and Matt Morris, have a great rest of your week.